Hi, everyone. We have just a minute before we get started, but I want to go ahead and let everyone in from the waiting room and introduce myself. My name is Caroline Griffin. I am Riot's Director of Operations, and I'm super excited to have you guys here with us today for what's going to be a fantastic lunch and learn with Mike Laut, CEO and Creative Director of Laut Design, based here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Laut has been a longtime supporter of Riot, and for those of you who have previously attended his Lunch and Learns, they are very popular. So we're super excited to have him back with us today virtually. Just a couple of quick reminders before we get started. Please do keep yourself muted throughout the presentation. If you do have questions, I encourage you to use the chat box. Mike will be answering all of the questions at the end of his presentation. This event will be recorded and posted to Riot's YouTube channel and Meetup group, so you'll be able to find it there after this presentation. But without further ado, I will hand it over to Mike, who is, just for your reference, keeping his personal screen muted, so you will just see the Laut Design logo there. But he is with us, so no worries there. So without further ado, thanks for being here with us today, Mike. We're super excited to hear from you.
Yeah, thanks for the intro. Thanks for everybody who's joining. I might turn my video on here at the end to answer questions, but for the time being, a lot of this content is visual. So I will go ahead and get started. So as Caroline mentioned, I'm the CEO of a design firm here in Raleigh. And when you do product development, like many other types of work, we benefit in a major way from being able to do very quick, really effective visuals. And I also teach that at the design school at NC State. So I've got a pretty extensive background taking people who claim that they can't draw and proving them wrong. So if you're kind of feeling like, what is this really going to do for me? Let's say that you work in something where visualization isn't an everyday part of it, like writing code or working in insurance or web development or something, whatever the case. I assure you that there's a huge advantage to being able to use some of what I'm going to show today. So just a quick background. We use this to explain the world that we work in at my firm. So we have this artist who cares quite a lot that the thing we're designing looks great. We have the engineer who makes it function and do its job. And we use some great partners locally for work like that when it's a technical thing that needs figuring out. And then we also leverage psychology, whether that's internal or also through a partner. The blend of these three disciplines addresses how cool the thing is, the style of it, whether it's usable and does its job from the perspective of the user's experience. And then does it address what people are looking for? Does it appeal to the senses? Does it convince them that it's something from a psychological perspective, they want it so bad they can't stand it? In the middle with the cool glasses on is this designer role that we play. So we do this work for big Fortune 50 brands down to smaller venture-backed groups, down to small startups and inventors. So the scale of client we work with is all over the place. We use this pretty traditional design process to do our work, which starts with research through ideation. We get into 3D CAD, we build prototypes, and then we optimize things for manufacture. So today we're going to talk about this ideation part of the process. So for those of you who are not familiar, we define ideation as, very simply put, concept formation. So this is the development of new ideas, different ways of solving a problem, different perceptions of what something could be, less risky alternatives, safer solutions, things that are more comfortable, they might cost less, whatever the case is. We spend a lot of time at work devising an idea and getting it visualized so somebody else can understand it. And quick visualization is something that we use every day. So in a general sense, there's this methodology around how to explain something new to people. You're typically telling them what you're going to tell them ahead of time, like I already did. You're going to tell them that thing. And then at the end, you're going to tell them what you told them. And that's how you make things sink in. And that's a methodology used in a bunch of different disciplines. But here's what I find. So in most of the meetings that I sit in that are of a corporate nature, there's always somebody doing what this guy is doing over here on the left, because this type of communication isn't what it could have been. And this is one of my favorite stock photos on the internet. I especially like her face there on the left. But I maintain that the reason he's sleeping is because there's nothing to look at. And if there had been, and if somebody had drawn something visually compelling that was exciting, then maybe he'd be awake. And we use this every day in our work. So the ideation ability that we put at the forefront, it helps us do things like whiteboard together, develop visuals that are going to help express the way something's going to look or going to feel. And this kind of work is really powerful when you go to show somebody something they've never seen before, the first of its kind, or I'm trying to explain to you what it might feel like to touch and hold that thing. How does the mechanic intent on the inside do what it does? Where are the parts? What are the parts? What are they made from? What are all the different ways that this thing could look? How big could it be? How small could it be? What does the surface language and the styling and everything say to me? So these are probably at first glance kind of extreme examples of what I'm going to go through. But the point that I'm going to make today is you don't need to be able to do this quite the same way that we do to be able to benefit from it. So as I mentioned already, this is what I typically hear day in and day out. I can't draw. Here's why drawing is important. It transcends language. So we communicate with companies and customers and vendors and partners that don't even speak English because they can look at a picture we've drawn, a number next to it, and refer back to it. You can do it anywhere. And I think that's even more important now than it's ever been, because if I'm working remotely, if I am traveling, if I'm staying in a hotel or whatever, you can always find pen and paper everywhere. The other thing I like about it is it's sort of like we have this culture of coffee being free almost everywhere you go when you go to a meeting. Pen and paper are also pretty much always free. You could get your hands on those in any business anywhere. It seems to impress just about anybody because it's not a common thing that people are really well versed in it, sort of like the ability to play music. My slide's out of date here, but I'll say that it still makes damn good money in 2021. It's therapeutic. It's good for you. It's good for the brain. So everybody that I start to try to teach how to draw, they try to treat the lesson like this, where I'm like, oh, hey, here's how you draw the owl. Draw some circles and then just draw the owl. And this is not a good way for people to learn how this works. And this is what most drawing classes try to do. So people say, well, I can't draw, or I can only draw a stick figure, or I can't even draw a stick figure. And to that, I say this: I can't play guitar. But the reason that I can't play guitar is because I don't know the scales. I've never practiced it. I've never put in any kind of time. I've never taken a class. I didn't have an interest in it enough to do it in my free time for fun. It never became fun, so I never did it more. And because I never did it more, I never got any better. And because I never got better, it was never a thing that I liked doing, right? So the cycle happens that keeps you out of doing something that you could be good at. It's not like a thing that you're born with, and I'll prove some of that today. The other thing that keeps people from approaching this is a psychological phenomenon of risk avoidance, where when people are subject to the dreaded critique, in other words, I'm going to produce something visual, I'm going to put it up there for the world to see, and then people are going to judge me, whether they do it in their own mind or whether they tell me what they do and don't like. People are always afraid of this dreaded critique. And we're going to talk today a little bit about how to get past that. How do you just start drawing? Use it in your day-to-day hobby, in your job, and do it with confidence, even though you might not be great at it yet. So I had a professor at design school at NC State that used to put this nice and awkwardly. He used to say, we're all in the shower together. And what he meant by that is when you sketch something, when you put it up on the wall, and you make this a thing that the room can see, and you're accepting everybody's judgment, you are exposing yourself. It's sort of like bearing your soul. And if everybody in the room is doing that, then we're all in it together. So I will prove what I mean. I won't ask for an answer because we're going to do questions and stuff at the end, but typically I would say, does anybody know what this is? And I would guess that we'd get a couple of stabs at it. We might get a correct answer, maybe not. People say, I don't know, it's a really poorly drawn circle. It might be the state of Michigan. It might be a really poorly drawn hand. I don't know. And so then I say, well, what about this one? And they say, I don't know, it kind of looks like a pumpkin. Or maybe there's some kind of a symbol or a ping pong paddle or something. And then I say, all right, well, what about this one? And then all of a sudden, everybody lights up and they say, oh, it's an apple. It's obviously an apple. And the reality is, this is a pretty poorly drawn apple. And where these images came from is from a study that Apple did as an Apple computer. And they had people try to recall their logo. And it was a study about their brand equity and the power of their brand. And as you can see here, there's some seriously different perceptions of what that icon looked like and people's ability to try to go recreate what they remember. So this was without looking at it. They had to try to think up what it was and draw that. And again, some of these are better than others. Some of them are totally terrible. The one in the middle at the bottom, I don't really understand what's going on there at all. So there's a very broad range of people's innate ability to imagine a thing, connect their brain to their hand, and recreate that thing. So there's some rules that I like to go over that allow people to do this better. And here they are. So these are my rules, and I'll go through them one by one. You've got to be the bravest person in the room, and that's not as hard as it sounds. And I'll show you an example of where that pays off big. You've got to make no excuses for the work you're doing. You cannot mock yourself in the work that you're doing. You complete what's very easy first. You push through the hard part, and then you snazz it up at the end. And then one of the key things that I find over and over again is once you've done something, you leave it there. So I'll explain what I mean by these 7 rules. When I got started in my career, I was probably about 20 years old, and I was still in undergrad, and I was going through this process of trying to get client meetings set up, and some of it was working. And I'd find myself in the corporate boardroom at Sony Ericsson back in the day, talking to people who had been an expert in their field for decades, longer than I'd even been alive in some cases. And it was sort of this attitude, it was like an imposter syndrome. And there were people in the room who had a really negative attitude towards somebody so young, and the kid in the room, why is this person here? What kind of expert could they possibly be, and why should I listen? Then I would grab the whiteboard marker and I would do my thing. And I would be the only person in the room not able to go sketch out what everybody was trying to describe and talk about, and we were burning hours and hours and hours. I would be the only person willing to even try. So it has nothing to do with my ability, my talent. I like the idea of this whiteboard example because if I'm in a room full of people and I have the whiteboard marker, I have all the power. Everybody is going to watch what I'm doing, whether they realize it or not. They're going to pay more attention to the visual than they are to the language being used, because that's what our human brain does. And because there's often only one marker for the whiteboard, nobody else can do this until I'm done. So drawing achieves this spontaneous agreement where all of a sudden you look around the room when you're trying to describe a thing and you see everybody start nodding their head in agreement. But the first step to being able to do this is to not make any excuses for your work. A mediocre drawing is still the only drawing on the whiteboard. And because that's the case, if you imagine somebody who is just about to give a concert, you imagine Jimi Hendrix, for my example, getting up on stage, there's a whole crowd of people, he gets his mic set up and all of that. The first thing he says is, I don't think this is really going to sound very good, but I'm going to play for you. So that's the same thing as me getting up in front of a room and saying, well, I really can't draw, but, or I can't even draw a good stick figure, but it makes no sense to preface a thing that you aren't good at by reminding everybody how bad you are at that thing. It makes way more sense to not make any excuses at all and try. So a big piece of this and related to it is to never mock yourself when you're trying to do this and you do what's easy. So everybody can recognize what's up here as a train. It's got 2 wheels in the front, 1 in the back. It's 2 rectangles, but somehow our brain is able to connect that to be a train. And instead of mocking myself and saying, I really don't like the way that I've drawn this, or this one's really not my favorite, it's the same thing as starting to say something where you say, I don't want to sound like an idiot, but it's like, nope, you're already an idiot. You've already kind of qualified yourself. So we never mock our own ability to visualize. Even if it's not as strong as somebody else, it's always easier to complete what's easy. So you start off with a basic representation of that thing. If you think about what an icon does, from a software perspective, it's representative of a much more complicated thing. The little video icon on Zoom does not have some really complex set of film reels or something. It doesn't have a bunch of buttons and electronics. It's just the simplest possible way to describe what it represents. And you can start there, and you can get people to start understanding what you're talking about. And as you go, you can start pushing through these details. And as I think about the object that I'm drawing, I can start adding more and more of what I think of when I define what that object is in my mind. For example, in this train, I might add a window. I might add that cow catcher thing in the front. I might have a smokestack and smoke coming out. And if I've got time, and it's really about the available time, I might be able to embellish this thing based on memory, based on a picture I found. And it sort of depends on this spectrum. How much time do I have, especially as an inexperienced ideator? How far can I get? And there's an appropriateness level based on how much time you have. If I'm just doing a quick sketch for an explanatory reason, I may not even get past the first one. I want to represent the object and then stop. Or if this thing, something about the way that it looks or the way that it works, the parts that it's made of is part of what I'm trying to describe, then I might take that a little bit farther. And if I'm doing this in the background while people are talking about something else, they're still going to be watching me, but I might have more time that way, and I'm able to get a lot farther. And I like to think of that as just snazzing it up with whatever available time you have. If you have extra time, then use it. And then one of the big important keys of this is you leave it there. I cannot tell you how many times I've gone to a meeting at a client's office. I get up and I'll draw on their whiteboard, or somebody from my team will do the same. We leave it there. We take off, we shake hands, or we used to. We leave the meeting, we come back 2 months later, 6 months later, and the sketch that we did is still on the board because nobody wanted to erase it. It may not have taken up their entire board like this one does, but I've even seen where people have drawn a line to sort of box it in and make sure that nobody gets rid of it because it was the vision for what they're all getting together to try to do. I've seen people print them out and hang them on the wall. I've seen them set them as their wallpaper on their desktop wallpaper on their computer. So you take pride in your work by leaving it up there, which is obvious. You can let it live on. And these drawings that were on the board a month ago that are still there, it's amazing how this thing happens where people said, oh, who drew that? You know, and all of a sudden, if you're the only one in your company or the only one on your team willing to try, you will start to become the person who is known for their ability to draw. Even if you don't actually draw any better than anyone else does, you're the one who was willing to give it a shot. And you were the only one with the whiteboard marker or the pen at the time. So even if your sketches and your drawings don't look like this, and they don't necessarily utilize great perspective, or that you don't think that they're quite where they should be, there's some really, really simple ways to elevate them a lot farther. And that doesn't necessarily need to involve taking a class like the one that I teach. So I pitch these as the 5 Ps of design sketching. There's perspective, there's pride, there's posture, practice, and pens. And I'll explain what I mean by each of these. One of the most fundamental things about sketching well is utilizing proper perspective. So I'll prove to you what I mean. And normally I would do this on a whiteboard, but since we're virtual, I've made a few examples. We have this example on the left, which does not utilize anything other than an isometric perspective. You've got a limited what's called a 2-point perspective in the center. And then you've got full-blown 3-point perspective over there on the right-hand side, which is what we use as designers. The alternative to that is no perspective. And you end up with a cube drawn like this, super confusing. It looks like it's inside out. It makes people uneasy. And just to remind you the difference between this and what I'm talking about, to put them both side by side, one of these is an understandable object, and one of them is complete chaos and total confusion. And that's obviously not what we're trying to create. When we get up to present to a group of people, we create PowerPoint slides to express ideas. We sketch on a little notepad or something and hand it around in a meeting. We utilize good perspective, and I'll show you what I mean here, to make sure that things line up properly and that I describe shape in a way that makes logical sense to my brain. I can draw with a diagrammatic isometric perspective, it's called, like what you see on the left, and this is very common in the engineering world. Or like what you see on the right, I can make things vanish. And in this case, I'm using 1-point perspective. And I can get a lot more visual impact and a better description of what that object is. We use this every day, no matter what we're working on, no matter what we're sketching. This is a fundamental piece of the way that we visualize. So this is a framework that we utilize. It's an underlayment in a way that we can describe form regardless of what the object we're describing is. You'll notice that there's all these kind of scratchy background lines happening all over the place. The idea there is we are creating a grid in 3 dimensions that all we're doing at that point is kind of like connecting the dots. If you can figure out where these lines should go, there's other tips and tricks and things, but if in a general sense, you're able to construct an object using perspective, which is one of the fundamentals, then you're already going to be ahead of 99.9% of people. There's also pride. And so what I mean by this is that same methodology that I described, where don't be afraid, don't make excuses, and leave your work where it goes. And all of a sudden, like I said, you're the only person in the room who's willing to do that. There's also posture. There's the way you sit at a desk, the way you sit at a table, the ability for your body to use the inbuilt mechanics to respond to what your brain is asking it to do. And that works, as you'd guess, really poorly when you're hunched over like that top example, and a lot better when you address something with better posture and I think greater pride, like the one that's shown at the bottom. It's like sitting to play a piano. You don't hunch over it. You sit properly, you arch your back, you sit up straight, and you have better range of movement with your arms and your hands. And then there's practice. And this is really the most key thing. You can learn the fundamentals, but if you don't practice, you will lose it. Things that you once knew that you no longer know. I like to say that drawing is a perishable skill. So I have a lot of people that try and they do pretty well, and then they give it up out of frustration, just like I would give up trying to learn guitar if I didn't practice. It's not going to be fun. And when you can get somebody into what's called flow, they are not perfect at a thing, but they're pretty good at it. They're having fun, they're challenged. And because they're having fun and they're challenged, you lose track of time. It means you do it longer. When you do it longer, you get more practice. When you get more practice, you get better. And when you're better at something, it's more fun. When you're more fun, you do it more often. And because you do it more often, on and on this cycle goes, where the exponential curve of your skill level starts to progress. And then the last P was pens. And the idea behind this is another thing that I see a lot of is people sit down to sketch. They if they're using a pen, they scribble out what they've done because they're not happy with it. They crumple up paper, or if they're using a pencil, they burn out the eraser, constantly re-editing and adjusting what they are trying to sketch. The reasoning behind using a pen, and I make my drawing classes at NC State use pens, is because you cannot hide what you've done. And just like recording, I heard a great example on a podcast the other day where if you're an Olympic diver, you may think your dive was great. And then you go back and review the video of it and realize that what felt good in the air and maybe didn't feel too bad as a landing was actually closer to a belly flop than it was to a good dive. You've got to review the footage. By drawing in pen and leaving it on the paper, just like leaving it on the whiteboard, it reminds you what to fix. And if I scrap it in the middle and give up and start again, you're not actually learning anything. It's better to draw lightly in pen and then finish dark over top of it what corrections you want to make. It's like showing your work in a math class or something. So if this still isn't resonating and you're not just going to learn how to sketch just from me telling you that it's valuable to do so, which is probably what some of you might be thinking, I'll remind you that people pay attention to any rich visual, any visual at all. And to illustrate what I mean, the world is full of great ways to say a thing that don't involve just text. For example, even on these wayfinding signs, I might be queued up right away with this top section in a different color to know where I am. And then from that point, where to get to where I might want to go. So there's a visual hierarchy. It's the reason why wayfinding signage is so bold, is because I need to find it. I need to immediately understand it. And if I'm in a vehicle moving 40 miles an hour, I need to understand it very quickly and be able to make a decision. We have a great example of this in Raleigh, born out of Raleigh, from a friend of mine, Matt Tomasulo, did this Walk My City program where right away, he grabs you with this simple statement. It's a 16-minute walk to Seaboard Station. The goal was, let's get people walking, maybe less vehicle traffic, better health, better well-being, Maybe I scan this QR code, which is there, but not huge. And if I want to learn more about it, or I want to get walking directions on my phone. My point is, any visual, people are drawn to that visual, whether it's an icon, a color. Big facilities like hospitals use ideas like this to try to help people understand where to go. So if I'm looking for the NICU, I just follow the purple road. I don't need to read anything. I just follow this colored line. There's lots of different types of easy visuals you can use if you don't know how to sketch or you're not yet confident like you're going to be. Icons, which I alluded to, are one of them. Lord knows the internet is full of available icons. You can use emojis nowadays. There's a bunch of resources that I'll tell you about where you can go find a quick icon representation to show just about anything. If you think about the purpose, these represent an object. They could be a category, an action that somebody should take. They could represent your brand. There's sort of like an endless variety of what icons can do for you. There's charts, which are something I love because they show something's place in space relative to other things. So you think of that like a map. This is a pretty literal example, a constellation map overlaid on top of the Milky Way. There are diagrams that you could find all kinds of references for, and everything from your IKEA furniture to an owner's manual for something that help the user understand how a thing is assembled. And if you think about what a diagram like this is able to achieve, it's a lot. I've described the system, every part of the system, the design of it in a simple enough way that I don't need color. I've just defined a process, so an order of operations. So if I'm going to assemble this, I know exactly what to do and in what order. I've also provided a name, its proximity in space, relative size to other items in the system. There's a lot of layers of what can happen in a good diagram. Maps obviously are a good one. They help with orientation and navigation. You can use clip art, whether you should or not, you can. It saves the time of drawing the thing since somebody else has already done it, in some cases pretty poorly, but in some cases in a useful way. And then you have images, and it's worth 1,000 words, just like Bob Ross says. So I have always, and for my whole career, wondered, why doesn't business listen to this? Why are most PowerPoint presentations as fun as a trip to the dentist? They look like this. 12-point Times New Roman font, bulleted list, super boring. I'm going to hit my viewer, my audience, with a wall of text. This is what we do with that exact same data. This is the exact same slide taken and adapted into a cool infographic instead. Why represent with words what I could just show with an icon or show a process or a flow chart? I used a good example of this in the drawing class that I teach, where your typical drawing syllabus looks like this one. And this is for a college class in a creative environment taught by a person who teaches drawing for a living. And here's mine, because it's something that I actually want my students to pay attention to. I want it to catch their eye, keep them engaged. I want to tell a story of something happening over a period of time. I want it to look like the kinds of things that we should be thinking about along the way. So instead, business does this. They give you this boring title. They give you bullet points, bullet points after bullet points. So if you think about this, it's like, on to the next bullet point. At this point, I'm not paying attention. I'm playing a game on my phone, starting to feel sleepy. Can I please leave the room? Losing the will to live. I've forgotten my name. Go sit in a dark room. These are not the meetings that you want to host. These are not the audiences that you want to entertain. Hierarchy matters a lot. And again, in the spirit of sketching well and being able to visualize quickly on the whiteboard, it doesn't matter how much text is on that board. Your brain cannot help but snap to that image first. This is used in other industries as well. So for example, headlines in the newspaper, put your eyes here, then here, automatically, you have no choice. So when we do things like design menus for restaurants, we do the same thing. We make sure that the branding is something that you see and feel. We call your attention to different sections so you can do some wayfinding. And then from there, you can sort of decide what's for you. The same is true in advertisement. When we do anything from a vehicle wrap to a flyer or something, that visual hierarchy, the representation of a thing through images, is critical to what we do. So tools for better hierarchy include the size of a thing, its relative size to other elements of the visual, other things on the screen or on the paper, the weight, so the thickness, how dark it is perhaps, which is also obviously related to the color, its proximity. Something to think about if you're trying to tell a story or explain a process. In this country, people read left to right, top to bottom. So when we do a layout page of sketches, we put the least finished ideas at the top left and the most finished final ideas at the bottom right. Because again, whether you like it or not, your natural inclination is to pay more attention to the one at the bottom right. So we go ahead and give that to you. You can also leverage opacity. So how transparent is something? And there's just about every graphic software on the planet has a slider for opacity, including PowerPoint and Keynote or whatever, MS Paint even, if that's what you're into. You have depth and the layering of objects over top of another. You've got tracking of text and how close together that text is spaced, and then the letting between the lines of how far apart lines of text are spaced, and they can mean different things. So to kind of help out with this, some available resources that I've assembled, I've made a cheat sheet for all of you. These are some great sites and resources that you can use to make this really easy on yourself, because at the end of the day, ideation does not equal sketching. And although that's the method that we often use, ideation can also be great icons, a cool chart, a diagram, a better graph, a visual representation of a way to represent information. So one of them is called Canva. And if you go to Canva, this is a really interesting site where you start with a font or a typeface. And based on graphic design principles, it will automatically suggest a pairing of type that you could use. Another really cool thing that this does is if you upload an image, it'll give you a suggested color palette like the one you see down there at the bottom based on the image you're using. So if I've got a visual on my PowerPoint slide, which every slide, by the way, should always have, I could use that image, I could upload it, and I could literally be given a color palette of maybe text color to use or the icons that I'm going to supplement it with. Here's where I could start. And it doesn't mean you can only use those, but how wonderful to have a computer-generated sampling of the most predominant colors in an image right there for you. Another one is called the Noun Project, and I use this almost every day, depending on what I'm working on. If you search for anything, whether it's toaster or syringe or ninja, I'm going to come up with an icon that someone somewhere has created of that thing. They've uploaded it to the glory of the internet for all to see and use. So there's no need to be able to be an expert. You can go use a free repository like this of icons and visuals that other people who are experts have created. Pictochart is another one. It's a really easy to use infographic maker. It speeds up a lot of the kind of work that a team like mine does. We definitely leverage some things that this sort of AI does not do. But if you're just looking for something basic, this is a great way to start leveraging icons and different photographs and elements. They've got templates for type hierarchy, like the headline concept that I mentioned. And then there's Font Awesome, which is another cool one. So instead of going online and searching for a concept or an object, Font Awesome, if you'll remember back in the day, there was a font called Wingdings. That was a random smattering of icons that would show up when you pressed all the different letter keys on your keyboard. Font Awesome is similar. It's a typeface where if you download it, you can copy and paste different icons, kind of like emojis or something, and it acts like a font on your computer. Use Iconic or Open Iconic. This is another one. It's very similar, pretty much the same idea as the Noun Project. And then there's all kinds of free visualization software out there. And there are varying degrees of experts, so don't be intimidated by some of their advertising. Some of this stuff is great just to doodle with your index finger on your iPhone or something. Procreate is one of our favorites. We also use Aviary. So this is a cool Photoshop-like editor. GIMP is another one. Nowadays, if you've got a tablet or an iOS or Android-based device, there's an app store full of like a countless number of would-be Photoshop competitors or something. So you've got a lot more options now than you once did. So your homework is to draw your next meeting's notes instead of write them. This is in the privacy of your own sketchbook. It's the concept of not having to pin it up and not exposing your soul to the world, but challenge yourself and see, can I remember the point of the meeting, the things I'm supposed to go do, or the things that others are supposed to go do by doodling a little icon that represents them instead of just purely writing a list. So as I wrap this up and kind of remind everybody who I am, how to get a hold of me, I could do it this way. Or I could use visuals to do that. Or I could take this even further and I could say thank you in a really concise, really easy to understand way, where if you've got any follow-up, you're welcome to reach out to me. So at this point, I'll open it up for any questions, but for anybody who doesn't have any and needs to get on with their day, thanks for your time. And it's been fun sharing this with you.
Thanks so much, Mike. That was a really great presentation. I enjoyed it for sure. We have a couple questions here, and I encourage you, if you have any questions, please do put those in the chat box. You're also welcome to unmute yourself and ask. But the first question here is, in terms of when we're presenting on the fly, how do you know when to use each of those types of perspective?
Practice is a big one. So if you work in a niche industry where you often would visualize the same thing, like let's say a computer or a keyboard or a mouse or something, that's what I would practice. So I have a way of sketching a chair, for example, for every time we do things like furniture design, where I start with a similar perspective and a similar view of that object because it's extremely descriptive. And instead of reinventing and making it hard on myself, I'll use what I've used before. Same thing applies where if you ask me to draw a turtle, odds are good that if you caught me 5 years ago and asked me to draw a turtle, I would have it facing the same way, the same posture, the same size as the one I would probably draw today. And even though I might have gotten better at the details, even though other things might have improved, the fundamental view that I chose to use or the perspective that I used is based on either one that's worked for me before, or go look at a reference, go find an image online. Like, what do I see when I Google that term? That's a great place to start.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Another question here. Are Font Awesome and the other tools royalty free?
Yes. So things like the Noun Project, you've got a choice when you go to download an icon. You can either donate if you choose to do it. You can use it for free under their guidelines, and it spells out what they are. Font Awesome has a free version. Almost all of these softwares have like a premium thing that is paid that might unlock other features. But let's face it, for basic visualization, for simple icons, even if you go to Google and go to their image search, you can turn on royalty free or license free. And it gives you a different set of search results, but you're still going to find an icon of a paper airplane or something.
Awesome. There's just some great feedback here. Everyone's saying how excellent this was, Mike. And I just want to answer the question. Yes, this recording will be available on Riot's YouTube channel and Meetup group. So that will be ready by tomorrow morning at the latest. A question here for you, Mike. When are you teaching classes and how long are they?
So typically the one that I teach at NC State is for a whole semester. I've also done workshops there that are like a spread out over a few weeks as opposed to an entire semester. I am not teaching right now. I will admit that teaching some of this stuff remotely over Zoom is a challenge. And I did it for the last semester of last year, but it's really a shame. I really want for that whole student body and just for really for everybody, but I welcome everybody to sign up once it's back in person. I think there's a whole lot that's gained by being able to get shoulder to shoulder at a whiteboard and try these things out together. And I'm a big proponent of teaching the thing by sitting next to somebody and showing them how to do it, as opposed to just describing it all the time. But feel free to shoot me an email if you're interested in trying to sign up for a class like that one. And then something that we've done, it's not as common and it's not really part of our core business, but I've done it. If your organization is interested in trying to bring that expertise in-house and try to get your team to be able to do this more, shoot me an email, because that's a thing we've done where we kind of act like that guy from the UPS commercials that draws on the whiteboard in front of the group. We can either come help your team do that, or we can train your team to do that yourselves as part of what we do as a creative firm.
Very cool. Thanks, Mike. Next question here. Is there a fairly easy Android app to use to sketch and save that is free or of minimal expense for a tablet with stylus, specifically for this question?
On Android, I'm not sure. I think there's probably a version of Procreate. There's also a piece of software called Autodesk Sketchbook Pro, I believe, and there's probably a Sketchbook Basic, I would guess. do some looking around. At the end of the day, I have found that now they're almost all the same. That didn't used to be the case, but what you'll find is there's an interface where you've got a blank white canvas, you've got brush tools on the left, you have layers on the right. So you can add a new layer every time you want to do something new, change color, whatever. And they get much more complicated than that, but in some ways, that's really all you need. There's also some pro stuff. And I would guess that these are, I'm used to them. Honestly, I can't remember what's free and what's not, but I'm used to these features being there because of the software that we use, but it'll automatically smooth your lines. And I have very mixed feelings about that because some of the techniques that I teach to get people to draw very well and with a lot of confidence, they build those skills. And that's part of what makes you good at it is you're really comfortable. You've trained your brain, you've trained your arm and your hand and your wrist and your fingers. If I've got software augmenting that, that's very cool if you don't do it very often and don't have time to practice, but you're probably not going to get that much better. It's like sitting down at one of those pianos that's programmed to sound good no matter which key you press.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Mike. Next question here. This individual does a monthly recap for their job, and it is all based on data. So would you suggest adding visuals, or is there a way to transform it all into images?
Yeah, so I mean, you think about what's a pie chart? That's a visual representation of a table. So I'm a huge proponent of anytime you can use a line graph, a pie chart, a bar graph, whatever, scatter chart, do it. There are things that we do where even when we go collect references from an industry, we do technical research, we talk about different variations and types of plastic formulations for how to mold parts, highly technical things like that. We will still use icon representations of option A, option B, option C. So there's definitely, if you think hard, there's definitely a way to get away from it just purely being a data-based presentation. It can be a visually representative data-based presentation instead. If you look for, I would go Google search for infographic examples. Every example of an infographic is either describing a set of data, it's describing a process, a user experience, a storyboard of steps to follow. So those are really good examples of how to represent an otherwise pretty complicated thing to write.
Thanks, Mike. This individual wants to know if you could provide a list of the sites that you showed.
Sure, maybe I can email you that after this.
Absolutely. Sounds good. Thanks, Mike. Next question here. How much does it cost to train our team to draw like that?
Email me. It sort of depends what you do, how long you want to do that for, who from our team would go do it. But let's talk it over. It's not something that would be prohibitively expensive. And I have found that, like I said, if you think about when is the last time you heard somebody play music well and thought, oh, that's boring. You know, I don't want to listen to that. Anytime you see somebody who can draw well, it's just fun. And it's a kind of a team building thing too, we have found. So even if you're not saying, hey, teach my team to sketch, just knowing that it's possible and getting everybody a break from a spreadsheet for a bit can be powerful.
Awesome. Next question here. Can you please show the syllabus slide again and tell us what you used to make it?
Sure. Let me pull that up. Yeah, so this is made, believe it or not, in a piece of software that comes native on a Mac computer called Pages. It's basically the MS Word equivalent. And the only reason I chose that to use for this was because it was going to be text heavy. There's going to be a lot of stuff in there. So if you think about it, let me annotate here. So if in the spirit of not being afraid to, draw in front of everybody live, I'm going to do it with a mouse in front of you. So hopefully you can see this little red squiggle showing up. For things like this, I might use a circle. I might cut it in half with a white box, and then I might use a white circle on the inside to create the negative space of the part that I actually wanted to keep. So there's a bunch of like little visual trickery that you could use. I'll copy that shape, I'll flip it the other way, and I'll change the color. And I could create something like this. It's just a better, more engaging, more exciting way to go through a piece of information like that. So I like that example. I'm glad somebody asked that because it gives me an opportunity to prove you do not have to have a $2,000 piece of graphic software to be able to go do something like that. Those tools are available in PowerPoint. They're available literally in MS Paint or something even fundamental. With that said, if I were to go create professional graphics, which is what our graphics team does, we use everything from Adobe Illustrator, we use Sketchbook, Sketchbook Pro, we use Procreate, we use another app called Envision. It all depends on the nature of what we're trying to visualize. But the cool thing too, that you all have as a tool in your toolbox that back when I started my education wasn't quite what it is now, you can watch a YouTube tutorial of anything at all. And if you go to YouTube and search for how to create a water drop effect or something, guaranteed there's going to be 100 results with 100 different ways to do it, and you can find the one that you want.
Really helpful. Thanks, Mike. Next question here. What is the process your firm uses? Sketch first, then Wacom, then SolidWorks, or other program depending on subject?
Sure. So that sounds like a pretty educated question. So because that's an educated question, I'll try to give you an educated answer. Everything that we do starts with research. So before we just start designing something new, we're going and finding industry data, we're finding visual references, we're creating something a certain way for a reason. And I try to make a point to mention that each time because as a designer, part of the job, we can sketch anything, but we probably shouldn't sketch everything. We're designing what we're creating based on what a user group asked for, what they need, what's going to be safer, what might be more cost effective, way less, be more environmentally friendly, and so forth. So we start with a reason. So then it's typically pen to paper, the cheapest ballpoint pen you can find. And I'm talking about the one that like somebody drops in the airport and it's not even worth picking up because it was like a 5-cent Bic round stick pen or something. I dwell on that because we don't use felt tipped based pens. We don't use gel pens like Pilot G2s or those kinds of things because they are so good at writing. They are actually very poor for drawing because I can't get variation in line weight from a good pen. So I really want kind of a cheap, crappy pen instead. If I press really lightly, I get light lines. If I press harder, I get really dark, solid lines, and I can leverage that line weight to do better sketches. So once we've got a whole stack of pages drawn, we'll move into SolidWorks. Typically is our industry's kind of standard CAD software. There's a dozen others, but that's the one that allows us to send files back and forth with everybody from engineering partners to molding facilities to manufacturers of any kind. We'll typically do some really high-end renderings based on that CAD data, where we apply materials and environmental lighting and some other effects. And then we'll usually move into a prototype build. So we've got a pretty robust prototyping shop in-house. It's about 3,500 square feet of everything from heavy machinery from the 1930s all the way to space age 3D printing equipment and whatever else. So building that thing, the first of its kind, is usually where our process tends to start to wind down before we'll either transition to a more detailed engineering partner or we'll move into sourcing for manufacturer for something where the design is finished.
Wonderful. Everyone is just saying in the comment section that this has been extremely helpful. So thank you, Mike. I'm not seeing any more questions. We'll leave it open for another minute or so. If you do have any questions, please put those in the chat box. But I really encourage you to reach out to Mike directly via LinkedIn or the Laut Design website. His whole team is just fantastic to work with. Mike, thanks so much for being here. Again, all the feedback in the comment and chat section is wonderful. So
yeah, thank you. Good to see that full. Thanks for everybody who paid attention and dealt with my raspy voice today. So I appreciate everybody's time, and yeah, feel free to email me if you got any other questions.
All right, thanks everyone. Take care. Thanks, Mike. Bye.
Yep. Bye-bye.